All right, you know where we're
Stephen A. wants revenge from yesterday after I blanked him. Shut out.
So he wants to just dive right into it?
I haven't lost a second to you yet, let alone a round, but we won't get started with that. Let's move on.
I like that.
Doesn't know it.
All right, we're going to start with Monday Night Football. Jay Cutler and the Bears lost their home opener to a rookie quarterback in Carson Wentz at Soldier Field, 29-14, leaving the Bears winless and the Eagles undefeated. Cutler went 12 for 17 with 157 yards and an interception. He also lost a fumble and was sacked 3 times. On the fumble, he injured his right hand. The Bears training staff looked at Cutler's hand, but he stayed in initially but left after the interception. Here's Ryan Clark on the Cutler situation.
When you take yourself out of a game, when it's going bad, you know what that's called, Greenie?
Quitting?
It's called a loser limp, right? You ever see a guy get beat deep and all of a sudden his hamstrings tight or he gets on the sideline and he's stretching? That's the loser limp. That's because I'm not playing well. This isn't going the way I want it to go. There is something a little bit wrong with me, so let's blame it on that. Let's give the people something else to talk about. And not only do I take myself out and give the people something else to talk about, I talk about it. I come tell you, guys, I couldn't play. The reason I'm messing up is because my thumb is hurt. Your thumb is hurt? A thumb? You are a football player. And if you, whether you're hurting your team or not, if you give your team the best opportunity to win, which they think he does, which is why he's the starting quarterback, you don't pull yourself.
All right, so Ryan Clark refers to it as the loser limp. Stephen A., do you think the Jay Cutler criticism we're hearing is justified?
Absolutely. A matter of fact, I'll take it a step further. I don't think it's nearly as intense as it should be. I'm going to repeat what I said when everybody accused me months ago of engaging in hyperbole. I'm going to call them all fools. I'm going to tell them all to wake up. I'm going to encourage the city of Chicago to ban this man from the city of Chicago. This dude is the worst quarterback in the NFL. He is an absolute joke. He always has been, he is, and he will remain that way until somebody gets inside of his head, because people on constant occasions keep deferring to his talent, his arm strength, his ability to make throws, his athleticism. Of course, Jay Cutler is talented in that regard, but that's exactly why I call him the worst quarterback in the NFL, because with those attributes at his disposal, he is still weak mentally. He is still somebody that is leaderless. He is somebody that brings absolutely positively nothing to the table. And I do mean absolutely nothing to the table that galvanizes the troops around him and get them to maximize their abilities. You have to remember, Max Kellerman, I'm not just some dude sitting up in here talking to folks in America because I'm sitting in a studio, whether it's in Philly, New York, Bristol, LA, or wherever the case may be. I'm in those locker rooms. I go to games. I talk to athletes. Ask some of these, I'm not going to mention names because I don't want to sit up there and put them on the spot. But think about former Chicago Bears players that are playing elsewhere. Walk up to them and ask them what has Stephen A. Smith said to them for years. Ask them what they used to do to come to Jay Cutler's defense, only to reach back to me later on after they departed from Chicago and say, damn, you got me there. Last year, Molly, if you recall, we were doing First Take from Jets camp, not just this summer, but the previous summer. We were doing Jets camp. Brandon Marshall came on there singing the praises of Ryan Fitzpatrick. And after being the biggest cheerleader in the world, wearing those pom-poms for Jay Cutler all of those years, what did he come on First Take and acknowledge? You know, I mean, stuff happens, man. What am I supposed to do? That's my quarterback. This is what they do. But last night, some dude named Pernell McPhee, who's on the PUP list, for those who don't know. That's the physically unable to perform list. This guy hasn't been available to the media. He has not practiced since the end of last season because he is hurt while in the throes of a 5-year, $15 million guaranteed deal. He can't even play. He can't even step on the field. And somehow, some way, after Jay Cutler threw that interception in the third quarter to Nigel Bradham, what did McPhee do? He bumped into him on purpose and then screamed at his quarterback. This is a dude on the PUP list who went off on his quarterback. Why? Because you know the man is weak. You know the man is leaderless. You know the man will quit on his team. And when you are a quarterback and you are willing to do those kind of things to your team, it just shows how pathetic you are. The Chicago Bears should get rid of Jay Cutler quick, fast, in a hurry. He is a football abomination. He is the worst kind of quarterback you can possibly have. I don't give a damn who you can go out there and get. Anybody but him, because at least you know guys like McCown and others will cry if they can't play because they want to play so badly, because they want to be there for their teammates. But Jay Cutler will quit. The last time I saw that man smile was when he was signing his contract. That's the only time in his career in Chicago I've ever seen him smile. Actually, in his entire NFL career. It was like he was laughing at Chicago and the NFL and football fans everywhere that somebody was stupid enough to give him that damn money. He is a joke. He is a horrible quarterback because he cannot lead, and he will not galvanize troops around him. The quicker they get rid of him, the better. The insults that have come his way are not nearly as intense as they should be. It should be worse than what he's getting right now, not better.
Get off the fence, Stephen A. How do you really feel about Jay Cutler? Look.
Well, take notes. Take notes, my brother.
Look,
you should do that too. Let's go.
He's on the MUP list, mentally unable to perform. Don't be so down on him. But all the reasons you just gave is why he's not better. But don't pretend it makes him the worst. Look, do I want Jay Cutler as the quarterback for my team? No, for the reasons you gave. They bring him down from being a big-armed, talented quarterback who's been – he quit in the NFC Championship game, that's true. But in order to quit in the NFC Championship game, you need to make it there. So all the things you just described bring him down to make him a low-average NFL quarterback, which is a pretty good player most of the time. If you're above replacement value, you know, you're better than the guys who aren't starting, you got some value. Now, how bad is he? Well, with Brandon Marshall, the guy who used to stick up for him and all that stuff, when he had a real prime elite target, not that Jeffrey is really good, but Brandon Marshall is an elite receiver. He was 18th out of 34 guys who qualified in that 2-year span in QBR. That's average, maybe a tick under average. So we can't sit here and by the way, since he's been in Chicago, he's in his 7th season, or 7+ seasons now, 2 games into his 8th season. He's 14th in wins over that time. Now, is that a bad player? No, you can't say he's the worst player. He's unfairly maligned, or not unfairly maligned, maligned out of proportion to the crimes he commits in that respect.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, he is.
That's all you got?
Yes.
That's all you got?
Yes.
He's maligned out of proportion? What does that mean?
You said he's the worst quarterback in football. You can't mean that.
I can mean that because I think that it's not just your talent that comes to the play when you're talking about playing the quarterback position. It's about how you galvanize troops.
So how did he get to the NFC Championship game in the first place in order to quit in that game? Because he can't play?
Hold it, wait a minute. I did not say it was always that way. I said he's that way now. You're saying you're engaging in revisionist history. I know he has the talent. I know he can make the throws. I know he's got arm strength. I even know that the offensive line for the Chicago Bears have been suspect for years. What I'm saying is that he has regressed considerably throughout the years to the point where you can make a legitimate argument that he is simply in this game for the money. He's got no heart for it, which is why you heard what Ryan Clark said. He's got no heart for it, which is why a guy on a pup list attacked him.
And those moments where I agree he seems to have quit on the team, I agree. I mean, listen, there are very talented fighters who I've seen quit. Does that make them the worst fighters in professional boxing? No. It just means they're not as good as they otherwise might be. Jay Cutler has what I saw, let me tell you what I saw last night. A bad offensive line, a bad secondary. Brandon Marshall ain't there anymore. Matt Forte ain't there anymore. And yet,
he was this way when they were around.
And yet,
or Martellus Bennett.
Right. He doesn't have a lot of weapons Stephen A. And yet, it wasn't really a blowout until the second half. I mean, like, they were hanging around in that game. So is that all on Jay Cutler? That makes him the worst quarterback in football? No, the numbers don't say it. The perception of Cutler is that he's a worse quarterback than he actually is. He went from being overrated based on potential to underrated based on this idea that he has no heart.
I got you, and I appreciate how you dance, my brother. I really do. But here's the deal.
Like a butterfly.
Let me ask you a question. And I'm going to ask Molly, because, you know, Molly Wood likes to try and get involved from time to time. You know, let me ask y'all this question. When did Brandon Marshall leave?
A couple years ago.
Say that again?
When did Brandon Marshall leave?
He left a couple of years ago, right?
There between 2012 and 14.
When did Matt Forte leave Chicago?
Just now.
Yep.
When did is Alshon Jeffrey that's still there? Wasn't he there when Brandon Marshall and Matt Forte were there?
Indeed.
Yes.
Can those dudes play? Or can they play?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then why haven't the Chicago Bears made the playoffs since 2010?
Why haven't they made the playoffs? Lots of teams.
Because of Cutler. Because of Cutler.
Well, what about the defense as well, Stephen A?
Stephen A, they're not playing defense. They're not protecting the quarterback. They're not blocking for the run, and they've lost skills position players. And
I am saying to you, that explains to me why they're not champions.
Okay.
There are plenty of teams throughout NFL history that have had the same question marks or the same suspects in terms of positions, whether it's a suspect defense, suspect on special teams, suspect on offense, etc., etc. They might make the playoffs, but they might lose. They might not win a Super Bowl. They would come up short, etc., etc. This man has not made the playoffs for the last 5 to 6 years. He is Jay Cutler. He's in the midst of a $126 million deal with over $50 million guaranteed. He sits up there, has a history of quitting on his team. He has a history of not showing up in big moments. He has a history of making mistakes. He has a history of being
None of those make him the worst quarterback.
That doesn't want it bad enough, which his teammates have said.
He's not. The organization isn't as good as a couple other organizations in the division. He's not Aaron Rodgers. We all know that. That doesn't make him the worst quarterback in the game. I don't.
When I
you
say
can't
the worst
support that with the evidence.
I can support it with the evidence because I'm seeing an individual that has a detrimental effect on the dudes around him. They don't want to play with him. They don't want to play for him. They don't believe in him, and he's the quarterback. If you're a running back or a wide receiver or somebody like that, it's different. But your quarterback can't be that dude.
And so he becomes a convenient.
That is uninspiring.
Listen, that part is true, but that he then becomes a convenient repository for everyone's complaints about Chicago, about the Bears, about the fact that you're blaming him, even though you acknowledged all the deficiencies that Molly brought up and that I brought up. You then acknowledge them, but then blame Cutler for them for some reason.
I am struck, Max, I will openly confess to you, when you use the word repository in a sports parlance, I don't understand what that means. I am lost.
I have a question. So are you saying that he's the worst leader in the league, not the worst quarterback then?
But listen.
So it's not based on skill set.
Hold on. How many times? Listen, I'm sorry, Molly. Do I have a problem with the English language? I mean, I thought I've said that on 1,000 occasions over the course of this show. I have said repeatedly, he's the worst quarterback because you have to be a leader, and he is not a leader. So the question that you just asked me, I believe I have answered 100 times over the last 2 years
Cousins a leader?
about Jay Cutler, because I was done with him for 2 years. Excuse me?
Is Kirk Cousins a leader?
I think that's highly doubtful, but he's got a division crown because they're the reigning NFC East champions. Okay. We shall see what he's made of. Plus, he was a backup that was elevated to that position because of the disappointment of RG3.
But the point is, I can point out various starting quarterbacks throughout the league where you can question their leadership, some who haven't made the playoffs, etc. But Cutler actually has a resume of some degree of success. Don't want him as the quarterback of my team. Saw him quit in the NFC Championship game. Understand the point that Ryan Clark makes about the loser limp. I mean, listen, There were plenty of people who thought that about Michael Johnson when he raced Donovan Bailey. Remember, he came up. I get the loser lip. You think you're going to lose and you come up lame. I understand that, and it makes sense in Cutler's case. But that doesn't erase the work that he's done. He has been a competent NFL quarterback for like a decade about. You're pretending that it didn't happen.
Tell you, you know what? Evidently, I need to be clearer for you folks, so let me try. He is the last quarterback that I would want on my team because the guys that are playing would not want to play for him. He's not a leader. He's not somebody that you go into the stadium on a Sunday and go like, this dude is going to take us there. He's going to get it done for us. You're thinking about how to get it done in spite of him. And you are literally praying that he will show up and produce for you.
Good.
That's Jay
Understood.
Cutler.
I'm glad that you admitted that I won that debate and that he's not the worst quarterback in the league.
By the way,
That's
just
I was waiting for the debate on that one, but go ahead.
Just to irk Stephen A. even more, as he alluded to, Cutler making $54 million guaranteed. That's the same as Aaron Rodgers. Stephen A. $10 million more than Drew Brees, $24 million more than Tom Brady, but we know he takes pay cuts for the greater good. So the Bears will be looking for their first win in prime time at Jerry's World. We want you guys to weigh in on that lovely conversation we just had as a family. Do you agree with Jay Cutler's decision to leave the game? Go on Twitter and vote. We'll share those results a little later in the show. Meanwhile, Eagles fans are feeling very good right now with their #2 overall pick, Carson Wentz. He kept it short Monday, throwing over 70% of his passes 10 or fewer yards. Wentz finished 21 of 34 for 190 yards in 1 TD. He was sacked twice, leading the Eagles to a 2-0 record now with a win over Cleveland in Week 1 and then Chicago last night. Max, what'd you see from Wentz?
I saw a guy who could not only make the dink and dunk throws, which is mostly what their offense is doing right now, obviously. He's a young quarterback in a very good situation with Doug Peterson. You know, contrast that to Goff in Los Angeles, where Jeff Fisher is his head coach. Everyone around Wentz was a quarterback at one point, and they seem to understand that, what he can do, what he may be capable of doing but really shouldn't be doing right now. The offense is playing that way, and even though he's dinking and dunking a lot and using his legs at times, when he wants to air it out down the field, Stephen A., he can do that too. He made some nice passes down the field, 2 of them for would-be touchdowns that went through Selleck's hands, the tight end in the end zone. Looked like it may have been deflected a little bit, still went through the tight end's hands. And another touchdown, or would-be touchdown to Jordan Matthews, that really was a beautiful pass that Jordan Matthews didn't haul in. So even when he needs to make those deep throws, he can throw it down the field. He has pocket presence. I don't know what there is not to like about this guy right now, and he seems to be in a really good situation. And not just the Wentz situation, but the Eagles just period right now look to be a much improved team. A lot of that might be the Wicked Witch is dead because Chip Kelly is gone and the sunshine came out. But I like what I'm seeing from Peterson. He is an aggressive coach. He goes for it on 4th down. What can you say? Right? They played 2 very bad teams, but you got to play whoever's in front of you. They've looked good, and so is Wentz, Stephen A.
Let me say this to you. The jury is still out on Carson Wentz. I know that's not a popular position to take today because he looked good last night. He has looked good in his first 2 games. I personally like him. I'm very fond of him, and I can't say enough about the job that Peterson is doing. He is a welcomed successor to Chip Kelly. Conventional football is taking place. The defense isn't being thrown to the wolves, left to hang out there and dry. As a result, they're rested, they're vibrant, they're vicious, they're going after it as best they possibly can. I'm impressed on that level. Carson Wentz has definitely impressed me, but here's where I pump the brakes. Your first game was against the Cleveland Browns. Your second game was against the leaderless Chicago Bears. That's your problem. So as far as I'm concerned, they haven't really played a team yet. In Cleveland's case, Hugh Jackson, DePodesta, Sashi Brown, I think they've got them aimed in the right direction, but it's going to take some time. They're simply not there. In the case of Chicago, I just went off about Jay Cutler. I told y'all last night the Eagles were going to win, and I said simply because of Jay Cutler, because I think he's that much of a joke. I literally believe that he's somebody that should give some of his money back. They should sue him to get some of his money back because I just think he's that much of a joke. I'm not joking, Molly. I'm dead serious. I think he's that bad. Now, having said all of that, I want to say this. You got Pittsburgh next week. You got Pittsburgh, okay? After Pittsburgh, you got the bye. You got road games at Detroit and Washington. Interesting. You got a home game against Minnesota. Then after that, you got road games at Dallas, at the New York Giants, and then you got Atlanta, and you're at Seattle. So when you look at some of these games on the Eagles' schedule, particularly road games at Seattle, at New York, at Dallas, at Washington, at Detroit, and then home games against Pittsburgh and Minnesota, I mean, it could get very interesting. We're going to find out a lot more about Carson Wentz. But I think we need to pump the brakes just a little bit because I've seen being in Philadelphia, Max, working here for 17 years for the Philadelphia Inquirer, knowing how desperate this fan base is for a winner, understanding what Donovan McNabb has brought to the table and how they've struggled, not just in the aftermath of it, but even before he ultimately departed from Philadelphia. It's been a long time, and so they can get really, really hyped. And I don't blame them because they deserve a reason to be excited. I'm just saying, had you beat quality teams to start the season, it would have been different. The fact that that's not the case yet, I'm saying, let me wait a minute.
The schedule you just went through, by the way, to me actually sounds like a typical NFL schedule, not extraordinarily weak or strong. It's a typical NFL schedule. You look at a team early in the year, you have questions about them, and questions about some of the teams on their schedule. Go, yeah, I don't know. We're going to find out. It doesn't look like, oh, my God, that's a murderer's row of teams they need to face. Some weak defenses there among the teams you mentioned, including Atlanta and some others. And Washington hasn't looked so good. Schwartz's defense really looked good yesterday. And the team, because I mentioned Peterson's kind of aggressive nature as a head coach, Schwartz's defense looked good. And what I was encouraged by, if I were an Eagles fan, which I'm not, I'm a Giants fan, this is like poison in my mouth, but the Eagles got stronger as the game went on. Now, this is very early in the season. Teams haven't really been thinking about Carson Wentz until very recently. He was not supposed to start. He is starting now. They've had some success. Teams are going to study what they're doing. They're going to make adjustments. I do not anticipate that Wentz will not throw any interceptions this year. He will certainly, I think, come down to earth as a rookie quarterback. But the question is, what did you think of Wentz, and how can you say anything but good things at this moment? The kid looks really good. He looks like the real deal. Is it an open and shut case? This guy's absolutely going to be great. We don't know that yet. The sample size is way too small. But so far, so good. And that goes across the line for the Eagles, including on the offensive line, where they thought they made some improvements. But I figured with Jason Peters coming back down to earth, he looks to be in decline. That would even out. In fact, Peters looked pretty good on some plays I was looking at yesterday. And the offensive line has seemed to get better. So if the O-line is better, Schwartz is coaching up the defense, Peterson's being aggressive, and they have a real find maybe at quarterback, Eagles are looking pretty good right now.
Well, listen, just remember, guys, Lane Johnson, he's due to be suspended. We don't know what's going to happen with him. You can't continue to have Jordan Matthews dropping a pass like he dropped last night. And again, once you learn to figure him out, it's going to be real interesting to see how he responds to better competition than what he's faced. Right now, you can say, okay, it looks good, 190 yards passing. But what you're really saying is that, damn it, he ain't Jared Goff. That's what you're really saying.
Well, or at least Jeff Fisher ain't his coach.
But looking forward to the game this weekend, as you guys alluded to, haven't played the toughest competition in getting the Steelers when they come to town. There was a lot of optimism surrounding the potential of the Minnesota Vikings this season, but there appears to be a cloud hanging over the team of late. We're just 2 weeks into the season. They've already lost their starting quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater. Then Sunday night against the Packers, Adrian Peterson tore his meniscus in his right knee. Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer, who said a timetable for Peterson's return is uncertain at this point. He did not rule out Peterson playing this week, though. He said the team is looking at several options. In the meantime, the Vikings are still basking in the glow of their victory over the Packers and the excellent play of quarterback Sam Bradford in his first start for the team. Max, I cannot believe I'm asking this, but could this Peterson injury actually be good for Sam Bradford?
And I can't believe I'm saying this, but the answer is yes. Unequivocally, it could be good for Bradford. The answer is yes. Look, Adrian Peterson, I don't think is as bad as he's looked in the first 2 games of this season. Because in the first 2 games of this season, he has fewer yards per carry than anyone since the merger over a 2-game stretch. Think about that for a second among people who had enough carries to qualify over the 2-game stretch. Fewest yards since the merger. Now, do I think that means that Peterson has fallen off the cliff and that I'm predicting for Tom Brady that happened to Kobe Bryant and Derek Jeter and Peyton Manning? No, I'm not ready to say that if he's healthy, because I saw Adrian Peterson last year run the ball extremely well. And I assumed at the time it's because they were run blocking well. They couldn't pass protect, but they could run block. But maybe not. So far this year, their run blocking has regressed. It's really not good. Their pass protection has gotten better. I'm not saying it's good, but it has progressed, not regressed. So if your pass protection is better, your run blocking is worse, you have an old running back who is in decline, because even last year, Peterson wasn't quite what he once was. And this year, he certainly hasn't been that. I mean, it's not all run blocking when you're averaging the fewest yards per carry since the merger. Then, yes, it can absolutely be detrimental, particularly because, Stephen A., Adrian Peterson is a legend, a future Hall of Famer, in the argument for greatest running back ever in his prime. I mean, he's in the argument. He was an absolute phenomenon. But look at and I'm not saying he's at the very end of his career, but by way of example, Kobe Bryant's last season, a high-volume scorer who wasn't good anymore but was a legend. Was that good or bad for the team? Derek Jeter, a front-of-the-order hitter who played a very important defensive position, who wasn't good anymore but was used a lot, because when you hit at the front of the order, you get more at-bats, etc., may have stopped the Yankees from making the playoffs that year, the last year of Jeter's career. Only the second time in his career they missed the playoffs. There's a real danger when a legend declines in the team overusing him and therefore making everybody else worse. And Adrian Peterson and the Vikings are now in that position, particularly considering the way that offensive line is playing, Stephen A. So I can't believe I'm saying it, but the answer is yes. This could be good for Bradford and the Vikings.
Well, I can't believe you're saying it because you can't believe it. And the fact of the matter is you shouldn't believe it because it's false. It's simply not true. When you look at Adrian Peterson and what he brings to the table, it doesn't matter that he had 19 yards on 12 carries. It doesn't matter about his age or attrition. It matters. What matters most is the aura, the specter of what he's capable of based on his history of illustrious play. You're talking about the leading rusher in football, somebody who has defied Father Time and defied insurmountable odds to be as great as he is. When you walk into a stadium and Adrian Peterson is in that backfield, you are worried to death. You recognize that this is an individual that you've got to pay attention to, that you've got to watch. Being concerned about that allows you to stuff the line of scrimmage, to suffocate the gaps, and ultimately frees your quarterback up to throw downfield, which is what Sam Bradford did, catching the Packers by surprise and looking so great in doing so by connecting with Stephon Diggs, whose coming out party was this past Sunday night. Without Adrian Peterson, all of that changes because you don't have a running back that requires that kind of attention and that kind of a threat. As a result, you're able to fall back into coverage. By falling back into coverage, you're able to defend receivers a bit better. And more importantly, you're forcing Sam Bradford to do things he's never historically done with any degree of consistency or success. Sam Bradford is a starting quarterback in this league, walked into Sunday night's game with a record of 25, 37, and 1. Obviously, now it's 26, 37, and 1. He had 3 strong games to close out the season for the Philadelphia Eagles last year, which is what got him a new 36-year deal over 2 years before he started crying, before he was on a mission to cry his way out of Philadelphia because they moved up in the draft to acquire Carson Wentz. So even though we saw Sam Bradford, even though I will openly admit he is a significant upgrade as a passer to Teddy Bridgewater, the fact that you don't have Adrian Peterson essentially puts you in a position where you're Sam Bradford and a top 5 defense in the NFL in the Minnesota Vikings are going to be your recipe for success because they're going to stop opposing offenses. It's going to give you more of an opportunity to get at opposing defenses if you're Sam Bradford. And maybe, just maybe, that might happen. But it's a huge maybe, and there is nothing to definitively say that Sam Bradford, or rather Adrian Peterson's absence, is a good thing, because without Adrian Peterson, this is Sam Bradford in St. Louis. This is Sam Bradford in Philadelphia. And how the hell has that worked out? That's the way that I look at it.
Well,
I don't see it as a good thing at all. They could overcome it. They could overcome it, but I don't see it as a good thing.
You can't say definitively because we don't have the evidence yet. But I'll tell you this. If Adrian Peterson continues to average 1.6 yards a carry, they ain't going to have to pay that much attention to him. And even if they do have to continue paying attention to him, you keep giving him the ball a lot, it's going to be bad. This comes to the clip. You're saying the threat of the legend outweighs the overuse of the legend. I think it's not the case anymore. I mean, Peterson's not, it's not just not blocking for him. He's not running the ball well.
You're misrepresenting my position. You're misrepresenting my position. I'm not talking about the overuse. I'm saying even Adrian Peterson there as a decoy significantly helps Sam Bradford, because even if he was averaging, let me tell you this, Max, it's week 3. Adrian Peterson never got hurt Sunday night. He's averaging 1.6 yards a carry. You walk into the game, who does Minnesota have on its schedule this week?
Panthers.
Carolina. You walk into the game against Carolina, and Adrian Peterson is in that backfield, averaging 1.9 yards a carry. You're telling me that Ron Rivera and that Panthers defense isn't up on their toes, ready, watching, and you know, for what Adrian Peterson might bring at them? No. He's been too great for too long not to pay attention to him, and that is what would help Sam Bradford.
I'm saying it's an unforgiving league, the NFL, and without the guarantee in the contracts like in the other leagues, and because it's so physical, you can go from hero to zero quickly. In other words, by week 3, will they be paying a lot of attention to him? Will they be nervous, just the threat of his presence there? Yeah, maybe still. But at a certain point this season, if he can't get the job done, that'll go away. It doesn't matter who you are in the NFL or what you've done. They will clock you, they will watch film, and if you can't get it done anymore, the threat goes away. It doesn't take that long.
Max, I'm sorry, but respectfully, I have to say to you that argument makes no sense. And I'm going to tell you why. Because, again, we're talking about Sam Bradford. When we ask the question, is losing Adrian Peterson a good thing, one must take into account what you have to replace him. And I'm not even talking about a running back. I'm talking about a Laquan Treadwell. I'm talking about a Stephon Diggs. I'm talking about a Kyle Rudolph. I'm talking about that offensive line. I'm talking about whatever running back you have to replace him. And most importantly, I'm talking about what is Sam Bradford going to do without the luxury and the cushion of having somebody like Adrian Peterson to say, I'm going to give this ball to him. What are y'all going to do about it? If nothing else, Max, it's going to force defenders to come up and pay attention, which is less people downfield, which is more room for Sam Bradford to operate.
It's, I think Stephon Diggs, you correctly identified, is the breakout offensive player on this team, the most dangerous offensive player on the team, and that may include Adrian Peterson, even if he's healthy, depending on how Peterson's season would have progressed without injury, let alone with injury. But here's a very simple formula for you. You have a team whose line is getting better at protecting the passer, and the passer is better than what you've had, at least in the short run, in terms of throwing the ball down the field. And young receivers are coming into their own. So in other words, the passing game is improving versus the run blocking, which has been terrible, and the running back behind that run blocking has been historically bad. it gives me no pleasure to say it. I'm just going by a 2-game stretch, yards per carry since the merger. So given those set of facts, is it better to throw the ball more or run the ball more? Is it better for the quarterback if a legend there may be some pressure to hand him the ball who's not being productive isn't there, or that he is there? Which is better for the quarterback?
And my response to that would be a question. Are we talking about a class in football or football? Because if you're talking about a class, you make absolute sense. I need to get my pad and pencil, take notes, and listen to Matt break down the X's and O's of football.
I've won another one.
But I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Max. I thought we were talking about actual football, not football class. Because if we're talking about actual football, I get to lean on what I have seen from Sam Bradford to make the argument that your logic makes no sense, Spock Kellerman. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Because you're being quite illogical, Stephen A.
You're ignoring Sam Bradford's history. You're ignoring it.
Actually, Sam Bradford, the one thing he's always done well is throw the ball down the field. He's done that pretty well.
Well, Max, wait a minute. But he's also not done it well, because we've seen plenty of instances when it's worked and even more when it hasn't. The man has never even had a winning record in his NFL career.
Well,
what are you talking about?
We're talking about a specific component of his game. But he also hasn't.
I'm talking about results.
Right? He hasn't been on good teams. Has he? Look, Sam Bradford is another one. Kirk Cousins, you can say this about. You can say this about Jay Cutler. The league has a ton of starting caliber quarterbacks who are on the bottom half of the league. Low average or a little bit worse quarterbacks. Sam Bradford, throughout his career, has fit into that category. Does he have strengths and weaknesses? Yes. One of his strengths is throwing the ball down the field. Does he have some targets now? Yes.
So when Sam Bradford was in St. Louis and everybody was bragging about their defense and they still were not winning games, he had nothing to do with that?
No, he was a young quarterback who was injury-prone when he was on the field. As I just described what he was on the field, a low-average quarterback when he was on the field. And if you have a great defense,
but if he's a low-average quarterback, but if you're a low-average quarterback, how do you benefit from Adrian Peterson not being there?
Well, how do you benefit? How do you benefit?
It's illogical. It makes no sense.
How do you bet? You can't call me Spock on the one hand and then say I'm illogical on the other. How do you benefit from handing the ball a lot to a running back that's getting you under 2 yards a carry?
Well, to answer your first question, I call you Spock because of your attempt to be logical. And I'll have that gloss over reality. That's number one. And number two, again, I'm saying to you, Adrian Peterson, when healthy, is the elite running back in all of football.
No.
And you're going to sit here and try to make the argument that Sam Bradford is better off wwithout him?
Adrian Peterson was better than Le'Veon Bell when they were both on the field last year? No. He's not better than Le'Veon Bell. Adrian Peterson hasn't been the best running back in football in a couple years, Stephen A. And I told you this was the last year he would still be Adrian Peterson, and I may have been off by 1 year. Adrian Peterson might already be gone.
Well, hold on. I'm a Steelers fan, and you brought up Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell had Big Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant and Heath Miller at the time, etc. Adrian Peterson had a suspect offensive line with Teddy Bridgewater as his quarterback who couldn't throw downfield. And you want to compare the two? Be my guest. We can have that debate another day.
All right, guys,
we could do that.
Sure.
We could do that.
We got to leave it there. The silver lining for this Vikings team, though, is that they have the 5th-ranked defense in the league. We've seen many players follow Colin Kaepernick's lead, deciding not to stand or making some sort of statement during the national anthem in order to bring attention to social injustice. And last night was no different, as the Eagles' Malcolm Jenkins, Stephen Means, and Ron Brooks stood with raised fists during the national anthem on Monday Night Football. Meanwhile, more tragedy has struck our country. In Tulsa, an unarmed black man was killed by a white Oklahoma officer who was responding to a stalled vehicle. The man can be seen in police video walking away from officers and toward his SUV with his hands up before he approaches the driver's side door, where he drops to the ground after being shocked with a stun gun, then fatally shot. This is exactly the type of thing the players have been trying to bring awareness to. Stephen A., how long do you expect these protests to continue?
It's not going to stop anytime soon. And when things like what transpired in Tulsa the other day, continue to happen, it's my fear that it's only going to intensify. And I want to say that if it does, one could argue that there's going to be legitimacy to the protest that ultimately will come forward. I want to read something to y'all a friend of mine sent me from Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, obviously in the 60s, of course, before he was assassinated. He was talking about protests that were ongoing, obviously fighting for civil rights and what have you. And he talked about the things that existed. He said it speaks to people wanting these speaking to people wanting these protests to stop at the time. He said the sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. Now, I bring those words up because on my radio show on Sirius XM, Mad Dog Sports Radio, every weekday from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I've had a multitude of white individuals call into my show, very thoughtful, God-fearing, decent Americans, just with a different point of view. And they were saying, when is this going to stop? I had one caller call me yesterday and say, if any of these Eagles protest tonight in any way, I'm going to be done with them. And I simply retorted by saying to him, think about what you're saying. They're getting on one knee or they're raising the fist, okay? That's what they're doing. They didn't impede anybody's ability to watch the game. They didn't impede the game from happening in any way. They didn't stall traffic. They didn't serve as an inconvenience to anybody. All they did was bring attention to inequities and inequalities and injustices that have been taking place in this country for decades, if not centuries. That's the reality of the situation here. And when you have people, and I have friends and loved ones who are completely against Colin Kaepernick, who are completely disgusted with him and done with him and anybody who mirrors his behavior because their mentality is, how dare you insult our nation, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how? How is he doing that? When he's bringing attention to the fact that our Pledge of Allegiance, that our Star-Spangled Banner, that, being indivisible with liberty and justice for all, the words that this country was founded upon, when you're challenging whether or not it's living up to that, because some people are receiving it, but other people in this nation, particularly black individuals, some who appear to be unarmed, are not receiving. How could you have a problem with that? Especially when the athletes themselves have specifically articulated, in no way are they talking about our military. In no way are they talking about our servicemen and women who honor our country with their service. They're not talking about that. They're talking about the injustices that have taken place in this country, the violence that has been perpetrated against individuals, particularly of African-American descent. Nobody said that white folks aren't suffering from violence. Nobody said that Latinos aren't suffering from violence. What they're saying is that what we see in the news, what we see continuously perpetrated with little to nothing being done about it, is that black individuals are suffering at the hands of some of these police officers when they're unarmed, whereas an Uber driver who happens to be white in Michigan shoots 6 people and he's arrested. A Dylan Roof in South Carolina murders 9 folks in a church in South Carolina, black folks. And not only is he arrested, which means he lived, of course, but he's also taken to Burger King to get a bite to eat because he was hungry. How is it that black people are dying, but white folks are getting arrested? That's the issue here. And so it's something that needs to be addressed. And you can have a debate as to how it can go further from here, because just doing this, what's the ultimate thing you're trying to achieve? What will define success in this quest? All of those things are legitimate questions. All of those things are the things that need to be discussed. But what cannot happen and what cannot be tolerated is us as a community and us as a nation turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to what exactly is transpiring. Every time we want to sit up there and quell the noise about what's transpiring, some other event comes forward to remind us that we may not even be second-class citizens in this nation, that our lives really, really don't matter. And something needs to be said about it, and something needs to be done about it. So whether we agree or disagree with Colin Kaepernick, the moment he said social and racial injustice, the moment he brought that cause up, and he specifically articulated that in no way was he speaking against our military, from the moment he did that, I had no problem with it. And the fact that other people do says something to me about them, not about Colin Kaepernick.
Okay, first of all, the protest, if you want to call it a protest, just raising your the Black Power salute, basically. Yes. People have a what? What? I mean, it's respectful. You're standing for it. Isn't that what everyone wants? But you're also making commentary, which is the most American thing to do. There's a sense out there among some that because race relations, I suppose, or the position of African Americans in this country has improved since, say, the 1960s, since the Civil Rights Movement, that many of the goals of the Civil Rights Movement have been achieved, or at least progress has been made in that direction, that since it used to be much worse, what are the kids complaining about now? And I will point out big differences in per capita income, education, et cetera. And unless you're the definition of a racist who believes that there are intrinsic properties of an African-American person that are somehow worse than everyone else, unless you're a hardcore racist that way, then you have to acknowledge that it is the result of the original sin of our country, which, of course, is ironic when you talk about America's history. We fought a revolution for freedom while we were a slave-owning country. And then a civil war was fought, the South, to perpetuate that system. So we are dealing with the effects of that in terms of inequity, in terms of inequality along racial lines. And if someone wants to make commentary about it, while we're all standing for the national anthem, and a lot has been made recently, a verse that is no longer sung, nothing can save the hireling or slave from the grave, which was a call to, at the time, and when the national anthem was written, a call about how the British were trying to recruit former slaves to fight against the United States, and our national anthem's talking about how you're going to put those former slaves in the grave. Yeah, maybe a black person would want to say, I'm making some commentary about the fact that I object to certain things about our society and our country's history and the way that is perpetuated or continues today. We see the reverberations. But there's something else also I wanted to talk about quickly, Stephen A. here, about the national anthem generally. It's a forced patriotic ritual, which is therefore hollow in many respects if no one ever objects to it. If participation is compulsory, if it's mandatory, what statement is really being made if no one can dissent? That's not patriotism. As Michael Eric Dyson has pointed out, that's nationalism. And I want to point this out. If you're doing that, not at an international event, but at a domestic event, these are American teams versus other American teams, then you may expect, if you're insinuating the national anthem, which is supposed to be for really an international stage, if you're insinuating that into domestic sporting events, given the history of this country and given what continues today, you might expect some commentary about that, about domestic policy and our domestic situation.
Max, there's something else I wanted to add to as well, because I forgot to mention it, and you probably forgot to mention it. Max Kellerman, there was a terrorist attack just a few days ago. It ultimately culminated in the suspect engaging in a shootout with police officers. 2 police officers were hit. This guy lived. How is it that unarmed black men are dying, but other folks end up living?
Yeah.
See, these are the kind of questions.
I've seen that
these
brought
are the kind
up
of
recently.
questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen that brought up recently, but I think there was a priority to keep this guy alive in that case, even at the expense of...
Fine.
Why isn't it also a priority to keep unarmed black men stopped for traffic incidents alive? That's another question, isn't it?
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
There we go. That's where I'm going. Because that's where black people are going. And that's what folks understand. And by the way, the last thing I'd like to say is this. Persecutors or oppressors do not get to dictate the actions of the persecuted or the oppressed. It's like somebody slapping you in the face and then turning around and they're mad because of how you retaliated.
Right.
Instead of taking into account the fact that they slapped you in the face. All right. I mean, it's just where we are right now, and it's not going to go away. Listen. We could say what we want about how we feel, and could Colin Kaepernick have done something different? Sure. Would I have chosen to do that? No. But there is no doubt that what he has brought attention to is a legitimate issue.
Right. If you inject...
And clearly, there are players that feel that way, and they're not going away. They're not going to go away.
If there's an arranged marriage, if you will, of sporting events, domestic sporting events in this country with forced patriotism or nationalism, expect commentary from the people who are being forced to participate or being pressured or encouraged to participate. Expect commentary.
161 black men have been shot and killed by police officers this year, according to Washington Post database tracking police shootings. Terrence Crutcher was just 40 years old, and our heart goes out to his family and all his loved ones.
Looking left this time, still looking, goes over the middle, and it is picked off. Picked off by the Cowboys in the end zone on the doorstep of a score.
Back to throw, good protection, runs up out of the pocket, runs to the goal line, leads it in. That's a great read by Dak Prescott. 2nd and 2 at the 4, handoff, inside, Alfred Morris, walks the dog. Alfred Morris comes back to Washington and puts Dallas on top.
Not a pretty game for the Redskins this weekend. In a news conference Monday, head coach Jay Gruden said that Kirk Cousins, quote, sometimes puts too much pressure on himself, but expressed support for his quarterback after Pro Football Talk reported that certain players in the locker room have complained about Cousins' play, which they found to be hesitant and erratic. Gruden defended his quarterback, saying the team has total faith that Kirk will get it done. Cousins has thrown just 1 TD this season and 3 interceptions. Cousins said people respond with emotion, and the criticism is understandable after their 0-2 start. So you got to respect his response there, right, Coach? Herm Edwards in the house. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. We have quarterback issues already in Washington.
Let's get right into it, shall we? Is the criticism justified for Kirk?
Well, it's going to be justified in the fact that he's a quarterback. And any time the quarterback plays the way he's played in the last 2 weeks, he's going to get some criticism. Now, with that being said, it shouldn't be left at his feet. You look at this football team, they paid a lot of money defensively to upgrade it, and right now they sit at 27th, giving up about 29 points a game, really worse than what they were last year. But Kirk Cousins, when you look at how he started last year, first 2 games, he threw 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. They were 1-1. Right now they're 0-2. He's thrown 3 interceptions and 1 touchdown. And so he's going to get a lot of criticism. But Kirk Cousins is really a guy that, when you think about him last year, this kind of really magnifies who he is. They were a 5-7 football team with 4 games left, and he caught fire. He went 4 in a row, they win the division at 9-7. And that's what you kind of remember. And then the playoff game kind of gets a little marred and all, you know, like, and it kind of, well, okay. So everyone's excited about these guys this year. They're coming in. When I got Josh Norman, they're going to fix their defense. And we're all excited about Washington. But this is who Kirk Cousins is. He'll have some hot moments where he'll play well. The problem I have with this whole scenario about the locker room, we saw this happen before with Robert Griffin. Now, he brought some of that on himself as well. But we saw this before. It festered. And it became the, you know, really the talking point. And everything else gets massaged. You know, when other players aren't playing up to their capability, it's always the quarterback. Okay, let's put on the quarterback. You know, and I've been in enough locker rooms, you don't want that. And Coach has to put a stop to it, because this is the thing that happened before with Robert Griffin.
Well,
Yes,
it's
sir.
interesting that you went there. It's interesting that you went there, Coach Herm Edwards. See, this is why I love you, because even when you don't realize it, you're looking out for a brother. Because you just threw a softball up there for me that I was waiting to swing. You know, Molly Wood, Max Kellerman, don't y'all notice how understanding Jay Gruden appears to be? You know, he sits up there and he talks about Kirk Cousins, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, but he's getting his numbers. He's thrown for nearly 700 yards. He's thrown for over 300 yards in the last game. You know, he seems a bit tentative, a bit protective of his numbers. you know, indicative of somebody who's trying to get that new contract. Y'all know what I'm saying? You understand where I'm coming from here? And the thing is that in the throes of all of that, do you see how understanding Jay Gruden is? But how he picked apart and dissected RG3, threw him under the bus, told everybody. I mean, he didn't just sit there and say RG3 was playing bad. Refresh my memory, coach. Didn't he tell you? Didn't he dissect everything from the 3-step drop to the 5-step drop, and how he wasn't reading through his progressions and all? I mean, this dude went. Am I lying, coach?
No, you're telling the truth.
He went into detail. He went into detail, y'all, about how bad RG3 was. But with Kirk Cousins, oh no, no such thing, never that, never that. Why would I do that? Let me sit up there and just say how Kirk Cousins is just struggling right now. But he'll get it turned around. It's our job to make sure he gets it turned around. But when it was RG3, I want to rake him through the coals and throw him under the bus. Jay Gruden, I wonder why that is, bro. I wonder why that is.
Well, I mean, listen, if you come in and you're as the head coach, you're tied to your guy and you run another guy out of town, you want him to succeed. Obviously, I would say this about Kirk Cousins. The jury is still out on him, which is why he got a jury is still out contract. He did catch fire at the end, coach. I didn't know why he was selected over RG3 as the guy in Washington. I didn't think he'd ever provided evidence that he kind of looked like he should be a good quarterback somehow. Some guys look, by the way, we're going to get into Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota soon enough, and I think some of that goes on with Winston right now over Mariota. Some guys looked the part more than the other guy, the way you imagine a quarterback's supposed to behave, but actually didn't get the results. But then he caught fire at the end of the season. He wound up with the second highest QBR among qualifiers. I'm not saying it's a perfect stat, but it's better than like passer rating, for example. Second highest QBR in the NFL last year. So there was reason to think he had progressed, but also enough well, we see him dinking and dunking. Can he throw it down the field? Can he do it, coach, as you say, consistently?
Yes.
So he got the jury is still out contract. Here's $20 million, a lot of money, 1 year, right? We ain't giving you a long-term deal. And he's like, well, good, I want to prove it, and da-da-da. And so far, Stephen A., he's not proving it. And even if he does catch fire here and there, he's just reinforcing at least what many of us feel, that he's not consistent enough to be an elite quarterback and to command a kind of long-term franchise player contract.
Stephen A. brought up a point, and it's a great point. And I remember talking about it last year, I believe, with Stephen A. We talked about how they handled Robert Griffin. And I think, if anything, and I'm going to give Jay the benefit of the doubt, I think he learned something from that. Because he got called out, too. Okay, and I think when you deal with the quarterback, regardless of how good he's playing or how bad he's playing, that's one of those conversations where that's kind of talked about in the back room, not publicly, you know, because you're tied to the quarterback. When you're the head coach, that's your guy. Regardless of how bad he's playing, that is your guy. You got to protect him a little bit, because when you call him out publicly and the locker room hears that, all bets are off. Then players just feel like they can comment on it, and that's never good. When you got a locker room that's divided against the quarterback, you got a problem.
Notice how like Washington, this seems to come up, where players feel enabled versus the coach, and play like already week 2, there's a vote of no confidence from players in the locker room. It's being widely reported and everything. And before with Robert Griffin III, it was the same sort of thing, where the players seemed enabled by the owner to bypass it's always a problem. And what I always say about this, a fish rots from the head down. Dan Snyder's organization always seems to have something going on like this.
Well, that's fair. That's fair, Max. But the point that I want to make sure that we articulate here is this. Even though both the RG3 era and the Kirk Cousins era has players venting about their quarterback, with RG3, some of it was self-inflicted because of his ego. But then Jay Gruden took it to another level. So why is it happening with Kirk Cousins, who's not like that? There can only be one reason, Coach, and you know what that reason is?
Talk to me.
A lot of guys inside that locker room are probably feeling like Kirk Cousins is too protected, too insulated, too cushioned by Jay Gruden, and they resent that. And that might be what's going on here, because there's nothing about Kirk Cousins' personality that generates this. This is about Jay Gruden and his willingness to be protective of Kirk Cousins, but he wasn't willing to do that for RG3.
Good point.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Certainly.
Point well made.
When we come back, Stephen A's favorite quarterback, Jay Cutler, making news for all the wrong reasons. Herm sticking around to react to it. Yes, we need you in this conversation. Yes, a voice of reason. That's next.
You don't know me,
Another rough night for Jay Cutler, who after fumbling the ball Monday night, injured his throwing hand. The Bears training staff had looked at his hand, and he initially stayed in, but he eventually exited after throwing an interception with 36 seconds remaining in the third. He said he was having trouble gripping the ball. Meanwhile, Browns quarterback Josh McCown, he took another route Sunday as he injured his shoulder and decided to stay in the game. Here's McCown on why.
I think it's just not wanting to not be out there with your guys. You know, I got a dad and an older brother who I know get up and go to work, and sometimes they don't feel great, and they go and they grind, you know. And then I got two little boys that they're playing football now, you know, and they get hit and they get banged up, and trying to teach them what toughness means, you know. And so for me, it's those things that, and just knowing the window for me right now, and understanding that I don't want to miss snaps. I don't want to be out, you know, without my guys. So, you know, for me, it's just, you know, unless it's, you know, going to fall off, let's try to make it work and make it go.
So Josh McCown doesn't believe in taking yourself out of the game. As for Jay Cutler, that appears to be a different story. Herm Edwards, do you have a problem with Jay leaving the game?
I do. And I take my coach's hat off. I think sometimes people forget I was a player first.
I don't forget.
And you have a responsibility when you play this game of football, and it's responsibility really is to your teammates. There's a lot of guys that are hurt. Some guys are injured. There's a difference. When you're injured, you can't function. You cannot play your position to help the football team. When you're hurt, everyone's hurt. If you play football, you hurt, okay? You hurt. I hurt right now from playing football. I get that. But, you know, Jay handled it wrong, and I know his head coach, John Fox. Played football with John Fox, and I know his mentality. And it generally works like this. When you see a player come off the field and you observe that something could be awry, your first instinct as a coach, okay, I'm going to go visit with the trainer, and then I'm going to visit with the player. And I want to walk up to him and look in his eye and say, what we got here? How you doing? And just in my history of doing that, and my recollect, when a player sits there and you're talking to him on the sideline in between, you know, the ball being changed or timeout, and if he starts giving you this long answer, you know what you say? Okay, you're out. Because he's trying to get out. Most of the time, players say, Coach, I'm good. I'm good. Never seen a player. Now, I don't know where the chain of command went, because Jay Cutler says at the end he's doing all this talking. I talked to the trainer. No, it's the head coach and the trainer, and then the coach makes the call. And then that way Jay Cutler doesn't come across like, well, I just left the game. I took myself out. You can't do that. Jay knows that. He's a veteran player. You can't do that, because now he's put it right back on him again. Like, did he quit on the team? Could he have finished the game? You know, I don't know that, but Jay Cutler shouldn't have been a part of this conversation. This is the head coach's conversation. He's the one that says, hey, I took him out. Now, that didn't happen. So now we're talking about Jay Cutler.
Coach.
Yes, sir.
Coach.
Give it to me.
I started out this show.
I saw you. I knew you was upset.
You know, Molly's been on this show for a few months. Outstanding. Max is my man. He's here now. But I think my audience, you know, folks got to understand, some people are getting to know me. Molly was laughing a little bit. Everybody was sitting there, come on, Stephen A. Jay Cutler's the worst quarterback. I'm not playing. I think he's horrible. And it has nothing to do with his ability. It has everything to do with the fact that I think he's the worst leader as a quarterback in the NFL. This man is in his 11th season as a starting quarterback. He has been to the playoffs one time. He has registered just 3 winning records. And on at least 2 occasions now, we literally have evidence of him quitting on his team. Players who have played with him will not swear by him. They only swear by him when they're with him because they don't want to throw their quarterback under the bus. The second they're away from him, they talk about him. I know because I have spoken to them personally. This dude doesn't want it. It is unquestionable. And that, to me, for a football player at the quarterback position, is the worst ingredients you can have. A quarterback, any other position, Coach, correct me if I'm wrong, any other position, is harmful as that could potentially be, you can overcome it. The one position on a football field where those kind of questions cannot exist about you is at the quarterback spot. Where people are questioning to quit or not.
This is, I come across fighters in boxing sometimes whose threshold for punishment and the heart and everything is not up to championship standards, right? And so they quit in the moment of truth. Now, that's because in boxing, we ask people to behave irrationally, to do things and take risks and take chances with their health that a normal person shouldn't do. But we're asking them, the talented ones, can you be a champion?
Yes.
So that's what's required. I understand your point about football. You want to be a quarterback, and Stephen A's point, you have to make some decisions about your future and your health that are not just business decisions. You got to sacrifice for your teammates, and it's that kind of a situation. I get that. And yet, even that said, hasn't Cutler shown enough talent in his career to not be considered the worst quarterback in the NFL?
Talent-wise, he is not the worst quarterback. But what Stephen A touched upon is very true. He's not a leader. He's not a leader.
Disqualifying him from playing quarterback, in your opinion?
No. There's a lot of quarterbacks that are not leaders. And the problem is he's not a leader. And you expect this guy to be a leader because he's played so long. Look, here's the numbers. This guy is a 3-staffer. You know what that means? 3 staffs have been fired. That's never good when you're the quarterback. He won't survive this one. He won't.
Will he make it to the end of the season?
Oh, he makes it to the end of the season. He'll probably start again. But if this thing doesn't get better, John Fox is going to move. They're going to move on. He's a 3-staffer. When a player's a 3-staffer and he gets 3 staffs fired, you think the next staff coming in there going, hey, I'm going to blame this guy?
Coach,
yes, go ahead.
I need to chime in here before we end this segment because Max keeps bringing up the boxing analogy, which I understand. But at the end of the day, Max, you know this better than me because, my God, do you know your boxing. When you're in that ring, no matter the trainer, the conditioning coach, it's all on you. Floyd Money Mayweather always said that to me. At the end, it's me. I'm the one in there when it's all said and done. That's different in football. You got 10 teammates on the field with you. You've got 52 other dudes in that same uniform, and everybody has a job description. This man ultimately sucks the life out of guys around him. That's why I call him the worst. It's not about his talent.
He did it.
It's because of that.
In an unforgivable way, in my opinion, in the NFC Championship game, where he had a really good defense, as Coach and I were talking before.
How do you recover from that?
That got him there. I understand that. However, to quit in the NFC Championship game, you need to make it to the NFC Championship game. He was doing something right to get there. And that's always been the case with him. He's had the talent that's kept him around, but he lacks that next ingredient. We're on the same page about that.
Nobody said he was the worst from years ago. I said he's the worst now because of that residue that you just brought up, because of the detrimental effect it has on the personnel around him.
You take Case Keenum or do you take Jay Cutler?
When's the last time you've been in Chicago? When's the last time you've been in Chicago? He has sucked the life out of that city in football.
Case Keenum or Jay Cutler,
He has
Coach?
sucked the life. Who was talking about the Bears?
Yeah, this is a prime example, and we say this all the time. Talent can be a curse when you don't live up to your talent.
Yes.
Curse of the gifted.
Very true. Let's let our First Take fam get involved here. We want you guys to weigh in on this conversation. Do you agree with Jay Cutler's decision to leave the game? Go on Twitter and vote. We'll share those results a little later in the show. Herm, you'll be back with us.
Yes.
So we appreciate. We always love your perspective as a player.
We should change that question.
And as a coach. We're going to
We should ask, is he the worst quarterback in football? Is Jay Cutler the worst quarterback in football?
That's
Put
a better
that up
question.
as a question.
Let's talk about boxing, because you guys have mentioned it a few times today. Is it the next mega fight in boxing, but will it happen in 2017? Max is going to tell us after the break. My question is, if it's a mega fight, can we get it? Canelo Alvarez was diagnosed on Monday with a fracture in his right thumb and will not fight again this year. Golden Boy Promotions announced Alvarez was due to return on December 10th against an opponent to be determined, but that fight is now off. Now, despite the changes to Alvarez's schedule, Golden Boy spokesman Stephen Friedman said it does not in any way alter the tentative plans for a mega fight between Alvarez and unified middleweight title holder Gennady Golovkin, September of next year. Max, you are working this fight, of course, for HBO on Saturday. Will a Canelo Triple G fight happen in 2017?
Yes, I believe it will. Of course, I believe Mayweather-Pacquiao would happen years before it actually did happen, and that's part of the legacy of that era. Mayweather and Pacquiao showed everybody, if you have an opponent out there that people want to see you fight, you can keep milking pay-per-view money because the carrot of that opponent keeps the audience interested and keeps them buying your fights no matter who you fight. And until people see that the fans stop showing up, they try to keep milking it. In this case, Golden Boy, the promoter of Alvarez, Oscar De La Hoya, who never ducked anyone as a fighter, has been on the record talking about, we want to make this fight happen, we want to make this fight happen. It needs to, quote-unquote, marinate. Triple G needs to be a bigger star. Triple G is selling out arenas really all across the world at this point, on both coasts, L.A. and New York, in London most recently. He's become a big star. Alvarez is an even bigger star. And Stephen A., I feel bad for Canelo because Canelo is not the ducking type, but he's also deferring to his team, to his promoter, saying that fight's not worth the money yet. And because he doesn't want to throw his promoter under the bus, he's taking bullets from fans saying, you're ducking Triple G. When I believe the truth is Golden Boy, the promoter, is for the time being ducking Triple G because they know there's a good chance their guy can lose the fight. So they want to milk a pay-per-view, which they just did this year. And they want to do one on Cinco de Mayo weekend next year and postpone Triple G to the fall of 2017, which, better late than never, but there's really no good reason from a fan's point of view why we have to wait past May for that fight.
Well, first of all, part of my brilliance is knowing that I'm not and listening to brilliance when I hear it. And when it comes to boxing, I completely and unequivocally defer to you because I know you know. And by the way, thank you for taking me to that HBO post-Emmy party the other night. It was off the chain.
Well, Stephen A. knows his boxing, too. I know this because you and me have been talking about boxing for years.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. But I defer to you, my brother. And here's the deal, Max. You didn't want to... Canelo doesn't want to throw Oscar De La Hoya under the bus. You certainly don't want to do that. I will. It's all on Oscar. And I say this respectfully. This is just an opinion. It's not reporting or anything other than the fact that I did speak to Triple G face-to-face months ago, and he talked to me then about how they were ducking him. I can quote him on that because he said it on my radio show. But when it comes to Oscar De La Hoya, who I respect, I know we've had jabs in the past, but it's all in fun. I got a lot of love and a lot of respect for Golden Boy, but I got to look into this camera and call Oscar De La Hoya out on national television right now, not just because he never ran from anybody as a fighter, with the exception of running from Felix Trinidad the last 4 rounds when they fought one another. That's the only time I ever saw him run in his career. Outside of that, he never ran for anybody. But Max, correct me if I'm wrong. Was not Oscar De La Hoya a breath of fresh air when he came into the promotional business? When you had Don King and Bob Arum and Lou DiBella and the crew, everybody, those three pretty much dominating the promotional landscape. Oscar De La Hoya comes along and he's a breath of fresh air. Why? Because he was willing to represent fighters in an upstanding fashion. Certainly not to say that Bob Arum is not. I love Bob Arum. But the point is that when you look at Oscar De La Hoya, he gave you the impression that the fans would never be cheated because he was about the business of giving fans the fights they wanted to see. And now that he's got Canelo Alvarez, which is his cash cow, suddenly he's adopted the mentality of the people he decried in the past. Oscar De La Hoya, with this Canelo avoiding Triple G, with Canelo summoning Triple G into the ring after he knocked out the undersized glass jaw of Amir Khan. Triple G calling him into the ring, talking about, I'm Mexican, we don't mess around, and we don't run from anybody. And Oscar sitting back there laughing and smiling, and then to come out here publicly and talking about how he made Triple G an 8-figure offer, which was very disingenuous. It seems to me that Oscar De La Hoya is replicating the very actions of what he decried from other promoters. He talked about Bob Arum. He talked about the Don Kings of the world. He talked about them in very unflattering terms, and here he is acting like he says they acted.
Listen,
it's wrong.
Dana
it's
White,
wrong.
Dana White doesn't do this.
He should be giving us the fight.
Dana White doesn't do this. Of course, he's promoting both sides of the fight. It's a little different when you promote both guys.
Yep.
Will you take a risk with your guy? Oscar is behaving right now. You mentioned Canelo's the economic engine of his promotional company. 100% that's true.
No question.
And he is acting as though he doesn't think his guy's going to win that fight. And that's not good for anybody, including Canelo. And when Canelo tells me in the ring that we just made Triple G the biggest offer of his career and we haven't heard back, the fact is, when the details came out about that, that's what Canelo told me during the post-fight interview this last Saturday night.
That's what I was leading to. Go ahead and say it. Yep.
The details came out. It's for next November that the offer is made. That's not a serious thing. The negotiations take place between now and then. The bottom line is Triple G wanted this fight for a long time. Canelo, I think, is bothered by the fact that fans say he's ducking, because believe me, listen, anyone who doesn't know boxing, Canelo ain't the ducking kind. But his promoter doesn't want to take that risk against Triple G, a man that most consider the baddest man on the planet.
Let's call this what it is. Last point. You can't knock Oscar for being the astute businessman that's trying to put himself in a position to make the most money. But it's two things that are very important. Number one, Oscar De La Hoya right now looks like a flaming hypocrite because he used to talk about promoters doing exactly what he's doing right now by prohibiting Canelo from having this fight. And the second part is this. Not only are you doing that, but guess what? If Canelo loses to Triple G, how is that going to compromise Canelo's money? Canelo's still going to come back and still be a beast and still make his money. Even if a potential rematch, it could be mega.
Here's the ultimate irony. Oscar De La Hoya, the fighter, was being promoted perfectly by Bob Arum. They were avoiding the toughest fights, making the winnable fights, and he was being criticized by hardcore boxing fans. Why don't you fight this guy, this guy, this guy? He leaves Top Rank, makes not always the best business decision as Floyd Mayweather did, takes a ton of risks, wins some, loses some, but has his own kind of pride now when he looks back in his career that he gained control of his career and fought everyone, not just Floyd and Hopkins and Trinidad, like everyone, Mosley, everybody. And Canelo is going to want the same thing for himself by the time his career is over. He may need to get control of his own career and start dictating to his promoter, look, I don't like the criticism, I got to fight that guy.
I call that an inside
Max,
look.
I'm going to be calling out. Molly, Max, I'm going to be calling out. I'm going to be talking about Oscar De La Hoya a lot over the next few months. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable.
All right, we will stay tuned for that. And Max, thank you for breaking that down for us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, back to the NFL. Jameis Winston had a week to forget in week 2, but is Stephen A. ready to jump off the Winston bandwagon? We'll tell you that. Herm Edwards will be back with us to join in on this conversation. Stay here. It's First Take. Last year's NFL draft was all about Jameis Winston versus Marcus Mariota. So Winston went first overall to the Bucs, but he didn't look like the #1 pick overall on Sunday. 4 interceptions, lost a fumble against the Cards. Meanwhile, the second overall pick, Mariota, led the Titans on an 83-yard game-winning drive on the road against the Lions. Herm's still here with us, but I want to start with Stephen A. on this one. Stephen A., have you changed your mind on Winston being better than Mariota after seeing that performance?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible afternoon for him. His worst game as a professional. There's no doubt about that. He's got to go through some growing pains, and that certainly doesn't help matters. We understand that, but it's an aberration. I saw him struggle in college and look miserable and come back in the same game, let alone other games. I saw him do the same thing as a rookie with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. When I think about Mariota, I'm not somebody who's down on Mariota. I'm not somebody who believes he can't play, that he can't get it done, that he's not going to be a good quarterback in this league. But when I think about Jameis Winston, again, it's the anti-Jay Cutler. I think he is a leader. I think he is about winning. I think he's filled with guts and heart. I think he galvanizes troops around him. And I think his energy is infectious and contagious. So what it does come down to is his ability. And does he have the ability to get the job done? He has shown periodically that he can. They're still growing as an organization. I think he'll be fine, but I think those intangibles that he brings to the quarterback position is what I give him as an edge over Mariota in Tennessee. Mariota's good, but I'm rolling with James.
A lot of people prematurely ordained Winston this year. They coronated him over Mariota like it wasn't a discussion anymore because Winston played the Atlanta defense, Mariota played the Minnesota defense. Of course, the guy playing the Atlanta defense looks a lot better week 1. I said it's too early to tell. As Luke Deneen points out from USA Today's For the Win, Winston looks the part. Winston's got a big arm and big charisma and leadership abilities, so we see star quarterback written all over him. And he was drafted #1 because of his accomplishments in college, which were extraordinary. But actually, when you look at the numbers, completion percentage, yards per attempt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's all Mariota. Now, I'm not saying that makes Mariota better than Winston, Coach, and I also don't mind the interceptions from Winston because I like to see a guy, just like turnovers from a point guard, especially when they're young. I like to see him champing at the bit. I like to see a guy who's trying to win and, most importantly, isn't afraid of losing. So sometimes I even like to see some turnovers, especially when they'll air it out down the field. So I'm not even holding that part against Winston. I'm just talking about what I see from Mariota, Coach. I think it's too early to make the call is what I'm saying. They're both excellent.
Well, I'm pulling for both these kids because I know that our league is much better when young quarterbacks perform well. Now, they have different personalities. And sometimes, you know, we listen to our personalities and we get attached to personalities of players like coaches. And Winston is one of those big personalities. And Stephen A's got him pegged. He's exactly right. He's a competitor. I coached the kid coming out of high school before he went to Florida State. I still talk to the kid, love him, like he's my son. You know, and big, strong guy, throws the ball, falls in love with his arm. Footwork is not always matched up with his throwing motion. He's going to throw it high. You know who else throws it high? Cam Newton. A lot of high balls. Because sometimes their footwork and they're so athletic, they have that arm, it gets away from them. Mariota's personality, and I'm not saying he's there. I'm not saying he's going to become this guy. A little bit like Eli Manning. Doesn't say a whole lot, does he? Eli Manning's like one of those guys. Is this guy leading? Is he a lead? People question Eli. I said, is this guy a leader? Can he do this in New York? Doesn't say a lot. Mariota's the same kind of guy.
But, Coach, when his helmet was twisted halfway around his head against that San Francisco defense in the playoffs in the NFC Championship, and he's getting up off the turf and winning the game, then he's a leader. I understand that, but I'm just saying, so Mariota, don't look at his personality, because he's not going to have that same that Winston has. Yep. But he has all the attributes of becoming a very good quarterback in our league. And I'm pulling for both these kids. I really am. And that's going to be, we're going to talk about this the next 10 years, right? Because these guys will be in the league. Hopefully they'll be successful. And then when we talk about who's won more championships, who's won more divisions, that's a good thing. I just want to point out, Coach, to the people who thought the ship had sailed already, that the argument was over because of week 1 of this year. Listen, Winston has the thing Stephen A. talked about, big arm, big charisma, leadership, it's all that. Mariota has better legs and is more accurate, and I don't know who's going to be better. I think it's going to be interesting to watch. Mariota, because of the offense he played in, and this is the knock on him, vertical passing down the field, not as accurate. 10 to 12 yards, very good. We saw him do that against Detroit. Final drive, he goes down, hits a couple really nice passes, accurate, within that window. His problem has been the ball down the field. That's all work in progress. These guys are still young. They're still young quarterbacks. All right.
All right.
I just think that in today's NFL, I just believe that in today's NFL culture, when you talk about the quarterback position, it's not just about your individual abilities to throw the football. It's about your ability to lead.
Yes.
I've seen several situations where, as a quarterback, you are able to get somebody else to be every bit as good as they can be because you're there.
I'm just saying, careful.
I don't diminish or underestimate that.
I'm just saying, careful how you interpret the personality. Like, no knock on Phillip Rivers. I love Phillip Rivers. I think he's become underrated. But he's more of a kind of Winston personality than, say, Eli Manning. But Eli's sitting there with 2 Super Bowl MVPs. So there are different ways to lead.
Some people lead by action.
Both these guys went to teams that there was a lot of veterans, right? They started as rookies. You've never heard any veteran on that team say these guys are not leaders. Not even Mariota.
Very good
They
point.
speak very highly of Mariota. If you go in that locker room and say, hey, man, this is our guy.
Good point.
We like this guy. So
Good point.
he's got the guys in the locker room that we'll ride with this one. We riding with him.
And
now, in that other locker room in Chicago right now, the guy been played 11 years.
You're so smooth.
No one in the locker room is saying we'll ride with him.
You know why? Perfect transition for me right now.
I'm just trying to help you out.
Please stay with us. Thank you. Just drop the mic. So as we discussed earlier in the show, Herm, perfect segue there. Do you agree with Cutler's decision to leave the game? Speaking of leading or lack of, we'll react to those results. We want to hear from you, especially Chicago fans. That's after the break.
They're coming.
First Take is brought to you by Infinity. Empower the drive.
The people have spoken, and we appreciate you weighing in here. We asked you earlier in the show, did you agree with Jay Cutler leaving the game last night? And the results are in. Stephen A. Smith, 58% agreeing with you in saying no. How do you feel about it?
I'm surprised it's that low.
Me too.
I think that's closer than I anticipated.
I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't give a damn whether people agree with me or not. I say what I mean what I say. Jay Cutler's a joke because he's not a leader. And as a quarterback in the NFL, with what coaches like Herm Edwards, what aficionados, what commentators like Max and others swear by is not just one's talent, but one's ability to lead from that position, which he has shown none of. In 10 years, he's made the playoffs just one time, all right? And he quit in the NFC Championship game. As far as I'm concerned, he quit last night. Nobody was surprised about it. And you had some dude on a PUP list, ain't even playing, that got in his face because he's questioning his willingness to go all out like the rest of his teammates would. They're saying this about the quarterback. A PUP list player got in the face of your franchise quarterback. That says it all.
Yeah,
I don't care what anybody says.
Sure,
I don't care what they think.
Jay Cutler is low-hanging fruit for everybody in football after the NFC Championship game, you know, and he quits again, and you see he'll quit once, he'll do it again, especially if, as Ryan Clark mentioned, it's a loser limp. In other words, Coach, it was a convenient time to get hurt. You make more out of it than you thought. But I am surprised that 58-42. I thought it'd be something like 80-20.
I know.
Yeah, and you know, and I think a lot of fans, you know, they look at it and go, well, hey, you know, if you're hurt, you're supposed to come out. Hey, look, this is professional football. These guys get paid to be football players. This is not college football, not high school football. That's a different mentality. Professional football, this is a profession.
Well,
and you're only as good as your reputation in the locker room. If those guys are going to follow you, as Stephen A. said, if you're going to play quarterback. You're only good as that reputation.
Well, Coach, and by the way, the people out there who disagree, like the 58 to 42%, it's because they're along the thinking of Molly and Max, which is to be respected. You're thinking about the talent that this guy has, and you're saying, okay, how could he possibly be the worst? So, of course, you're going to take that position because that makes sense. I'm saying it has nothing to do with his talent. It's that he's such a depressing figure. He sucks the life out of the people around him, which is why Chicago's not going to go anywhere with him. That's why I call him the worst.
I'll tell you something
else.
else.
It has nothing to do with his talent.
I still don't think he's the worst, but I will say this. When you're 27 and you have a big arm and you have still the potential for upside, people will have a longer leash.
Sure.
Yeah. When you're 33 and you're in decline and you're on a bad team and you're doing this stuff, boy, there's a leash.
I want to know how many of the supporters went to Vanderbilt or
all I know
Chicago.
is he has that demeanor about himself when things are not going good, like he's sucking lemons. That's never good. That's never a good look on your face, is it?
We don't want it. We want to turn it into lemonade, like we
Chicago
always do, Herm Edwards.
Chicago, the city of Chicago will be better
Bye,
off
everybody.
without
See you
him.
tomorrow.
Good riddance.